I stood in the mirror adjusting my navy blue dress, the one I'd bought specifically because it wouldn't stand out. My hands trembled as I fastened the simple pearl necklace, a gift I'd given myself after my first big promotion. Through the hotel window, the sprawling grounds of the Sterling estate stretched out below, manicured lawns giving way to rose gardens and white tent pavilions. Somewhere down there, my sister Diane was preparing to marry Marcus Donovan in what our mother had been calling the social event of the season. I hadn't wanted to come. For 3 weeks, I'd crafted excuses in my head, each one more elaborate than the last. A critical business merger. An international conference. A sudden illness. But guilt has a way of outweighing self-preservation, and so here I was, Victoria Hartwell, 32 years old and still seeking approval from a family that had made it clear I would never truly belong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hotel carpet. I could hear the distant sound of string musicians rehearsing, their notes floating up through the warm spring air. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin Walsh, my chief operating officer and one of the few people who knew the full story of why I'd been dreading this weekend. "You've got this, Tori. Remember who you are now, not who they made you feel like you were." I smiled at the screen, grateful for his friendship. He was right, of course. I'd built something remarkable in Seattle, far from Portland's judging eyes and whispered conversations. Apex Solutions had grown from a startup in my cramped apartment to a consulting firm with over 200 employees and contracts with some of the biggest technology companies on the West Coast. I'd earned every success through sleepless nights and relentless determination, proving wrong everyone who'd ever doubted me. But standing here, about to walk into a room full of people who'd known me as the scandal, the mistake, the illegitimate daughter that Catherine Hartwell barely acknowledged, I felt 15 again. Small. Unwanted. Wrong. I grabbed my clutch and headed for the door before I could change my mind. The drive from the hotel to the Sterling estate took only 10 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another world. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits made their way toward the garden entrance, their laughter bright and effortless. I recognized several faces from my childhood, members of Portland's elite social circle that my mother had always desperately wanted to belong to. Some of them glanced my way as I approached, their expressions flickering with recognition before sliding into careful neutrality. The estate itself was breathtaking, I had to admit. White columns framed the entrance to the main building, while pathways wound through gardens bursting with late spring blooms. Somewhere a fountain bubbled, and the air smelled of roses and fresh-cut grass. Staff members in crisp uniforms directed guests toward the ceremony site, a stunning outdoor space where rows of white chairs faced an arbor draped in silk and flowers. I found a seat near the back, hoping to remain invisible. Other guests filtered in, their conversations a low hum of excitement and social pleasantries. I caught fragments about Diane's dress, about Marcus's family, about the honeymoon planned for the Greek islands. No one sat near me, though whether by design or coincidence, I couldn't say. Then I saw her. Catherine Hartwell moved through the crowd like royalty greeting subjects, her silver hair perfectly styled, her champagne-colored gown clearly custom-made. She'd always been beautiful in that cold, untouchable way, her features sharp and her posture impeccable. Age had only refined her elegance, though it had done nothing to soften her edges. She laughed at something Gordon Price said, touching his arm in that practiced way she had of making people feel special and chosen. Her eyes swept across the assembled guests, taking inventory, ensuring everything met her exacting standards. When her gaze landed on me, there was no warmth, no acknowledgement beyond a brief flicker of something, distaste perhaps, or merely tolerance. She looked away immediately, returning her attention to more worthy company. The ceremony began with the processional music swelling through hidden speakers. Diane's bridesmaids came first, including Natalie Brooks, who'd been my sister's best friend since high school and had never once spoken directly to me at any family function. They moved down the aisle in coordinated grace, their pale pink dresses catching the afternoon light. Then came Diane herself, radiant in a gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, her arm linked through the arm of our uncle since our father had passed away 5 years earlier. She looked genuinely happy, her smile bright and unguarded as she caught sight of Marcus waiting at the altar. For a moment, I felt something unexpected, not jealousy exactly, but a hollow ache for what might have been if circumstances had been different. If our father's affair with my mother hadn't shattered the perfect family image Catherine had worked so hard to maintain. If I'd been born inside the bounds of respectability instead of outside them. Marcus Donovan stood tall and composed, his dark suit perfectly fitted, his expression warm as he watched his bride approach. I'd only met him twice before, both times at family dinners where I'd been included out of obligation rather than desire. He'd been polite to me, nothing more, but there had been something in his eyes, a sharpness, an awareness that suggested he saw more than others realized. The ceremony itself was traditional and beautiful. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, about two families joining together. Catherine dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the emotional mother perfectly. I wondered if anyone else noticed how her tears came without any real warmth, how they seemed more like a performance than genuine feeling. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence stretched long and uncomfortable as it always does during that moment. I felt my heart pound inexplicably, though I had no intention of speaking. What would I even say? The ceremony concluded with applause and cheers as Marcus and Diane kissed, now husband and wife. They walked back down the aisle together, beaming at their guests, and I clapped along with everyone else, maintaining my invisible presence in the back row. The crowd began moving toward the reception area, conversations picking up again with renewed energy. I let myself be carried along with the flow, hoping to find a quiet corner where I could fulfill my obligation without drawing attention. The reception hall was even more spectacular than the ceremony site. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across tables draped in ivory linens. Centerpieces of white orchids and roses adorned each table, and a string quartet played soft music from a raised platform. Staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked like tiny works of art. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and found the seating chart, searching for my name. I was placed at table 17, far from the head table where family members sat, grouped instead with distant cousins and plus ones I'd never met. It was exactly what I'd expected, and somehow it still stung. I made my way to the table and sat down, offering polite smiles to the other guests who were already seated. They introduced themselves with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Most were related to Marcus's family, and they seemed genuinely nice, asking questions about where I was from and what I did for work. I kept my answers vague, mentioning Seattle and consulting but avoiding specifics. The last thing I needed was someone making the connection between me and Apex Solutions, which had been featured in several business publications recently. I wanted to remain invisible, to get through this evening and return to my real life where my worth wasn't measured by my parentage. Dinner was served in courses, each plate more elaborate than the last. The food was excellent, though I barely tasted it. My attention kept drifting to the head table where Diane and Marcus sat surrounded by immediate family. Catherine held court there, her laughter carrying across the room. She'd positioned herself as the gracious hostess, ensuring everyone felt welcomed and celebrated. Everyone except me, of course, but that was nothing new. I'd grown up on the margins of this family, present but not participating, acknowledged but not accepted. My father had done his best before his death, insisting I be included in holidays and major events, but his efforts had always been undercut by Catherine's cold civility and Diane's indifference. The speeches began after the main course. Marcus's father spoke first, welcoming Diane into their family with genuine warmth that made my chest tight. Then Catherine rose, microphone in hand, looking every inch the proud mother. She spoke eloquently about watching Diane grow up, about the values she'd instilled, about the importance of family and tradition and maintaining standards. Her words were carefully chosen, each sentence polished to perfection. She talked about legacy and bloodline, about children carrying forward the best of their heritage. I felt the champagne turn sour in my stomach as I understood the subtext beneath her gracious words. This was her family, her legitimate daughter marrying into an excellent family, continuing the Hartwell name with dignity and pride. After dinner, guests began mingling again, moving between tables and gathering in small clusters to talk. I excused myself and found refuge near the garden terrace doors, away from the main crowd. The evening air was cooler now, and I considered slipping outside entirely when I heard Catherine's voice behind me. She was speaking to Helen Donovan, Marcus's mother, their conversation floating over the ambient noise of the reception. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but something in Catherine's tone made me freeze. She was talking about family, about how proud she was that Diane had made such a wonderful match. Then her voice dropped slightly, taking on that particular edge I knew too well. "Of course, we've had our challenges over the years," Catherine said, her words precise and cutting. "There are certain complications that arise when standards aren't maintained. Richard's indiscretion created difficulties, naturally. But I made sure Diane understood the importance of legitimacy, of proper family structure. Some children belong at occasions like this, and others, well, they simply don't have the same place in society. Illegitimate children may share blood, but they don't share the family name in any meaningful way." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's important to maintain those distinctions. The words hit like physical blows. I stood frozen, the champagne glass trembling in my hand. Around me, the reception continued, oblivious. Music played. People laughed. But in that moment, everything narrowed to Catherine's voice dismissing my entire existence as a complication, an indiscretion, something less than worthy of acknowledgement. I'd heard variations of this sentiment my whole life, felt it in every cold greeting and forced invitation. But hearing it stated so baldly, so casually, as if my worth as a human being was simply a matter of biological timing and legal paperwork, it shattered something inside me that I'd been carefully holding together. Helen Donovan's response was too quiet for me to hear, but I saw her expression, a flicker of discomfort or perhaps disagreement. She glanced around, and her eyes landed on me for just a second. I saw recognition there, and something else, concern maybe, or pity. I couldn't bear either. I set down my champagne glass with shaking hands and turned toward the exit, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but here. But before I could take more than 2 steps, I heard Marcus's voice cut through the ambient noise with startling clarity. "Excuse me, everyone, if I could have your attention for just a moment." The music lowered. Conversations died down. Heads turned toward the center of the reception hall where Marcus stood, microphone in hand, his expression serious. Diane looked up at him with a confused smile, clearly not expecting another speech. Catherine straightened, her public face sliding effortlessly into place, ready to bask in whatever lovely words her new son-in-law was about to share. I remained frozen near the terrace doors, half in shadow, wanting desperately to disappear but unable to move. Marcus's eyes scanned the room until they found me. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw something there that I couldn't quite identify, determination perhaps, or resolve. When he spoke again, his voice carried to every corner of the hushed hall. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who I believe deserves recognition tonight. Someone whose presence here matters very much to me personally." Catherine's smile remained fixed, though something uncertain flickered behind her eyes. Other guests looked around, trying to figure out who Marcus meant. I felt my heart hammering, a sick sense of dread building in my stomach. "Victoria Hartwell," Marcus said, and the room seemed to tilt. "Could you please join us up here?" Every eye in the reception hall turned toward me. I stood rooted to the spot, my mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. This was it, the public humiliation I'd feared, the moment where my illegitimacy would be announced and dissected in front of Portland's elite. But Marcus's expression held no malice, only something that looked almost like respect. Diane stared at her husband in confusion. Catherine's face had gone very pale, her composed mask slipping for just a fraction of a second. I forced my legs to move, crossing the polished floor on unsteady feet. The walk felt endless, every eye tracking my progress. When I reached Marcus, he handed me the microphone with a small, encouraging nod. I took it with trembling hands, having absolutely no idea what was happening or what I was supposed to say. The silence stretched, heavy with anticipation and confusion. Then Marcus spoke again, his words clear and deliberate, pitched for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to properly meet Victoria Hartwell, founder and CEO of Apex Solutions, one of the most innovative consulting firms in the Pacific Northwest. Madam CEO, it's an honor to have you at our wedding." The microphone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. The silence in the reception hall was absolute, broken only by the faint clink of a champagne glass being set down somewhere in the back. 200 faces stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to confusion to dawning recognition. I saw Linda Crawford's eyes widen as she pulled out her phone, no doubt already searching for my company. Gordon Price leaned over to whisper something to his wife, his eyebrows raised in surprise. And Catherine, my mother who wasn't really my mother in any way that mattered, stood frozen with her champagne glass halfway to her lips, the color draining from her carefully made-up face. Marcus took the microphone back gently, giving me a moment to collect myself. His voice remained steady and warm as he continued addressing the crowd. "Some of you may have read about Apex Solutions in the Wall Street Journal last month when they secured the Richardson Technologies contract, one of the largest consulting deals on the West Coast this year. Victoria has built something extraordinary, and I've had the privilege of working with her team on several projects through my own company. Her expertise, integrity, and innovation have been invaluable." He turned to face Catherine directly, his smile polite but his eyes sharp. "So when I heard earlier this evening that illegitimate children don't belong at occasions like this, I felt it was important to clarify something. Success, character, and worthiness have nothing to do with the circumstances of one's birth. They're earned through hard work, intelligence, and treating people with dignity, qualities Victoria embodies completely." The impact of his words rippled through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Helen Donovan's expression had transformed from polite interest to something fiercer, protective almost, as she looked between her son and Catherine. Diane sat very still, her bouquet clutched in her lap, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to read. And Catherine, she looked as though she'd been struck. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The gracious hostess mask she'd worn all evening cracked down the middle, revealing something raw and furious underneath. I found my voice finally, though it came out quieter than I'd intended. "Thank you, Marcus. That's very kind of you to say." I handed the microphone to a nearby staff member, my hands still trembling but my spine straightening with each breath. Marcus had just done something I hadn't expected. He'd given me back my dignity in front of everyone who'd spent years denying I deserved it. He'd taken Catherine's cruelty and turned it into a spotlight on everything I'd achieved despite her. The guests began applauding, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Several people I didn't know smiled at me with what looked like genuine warmth. Patricia Reed, the wedding planner I'd noticed earlier hovering at the edges of the event, gave me a discreet thumbs up from near the kitchen entrance. Marcus raised his glass. "To family, in all its forms, and to recognizing the extraordinary people in our lives regardless of how they came to be part of our story." The toast was echoed across the room, glasses lifting, but not everyone participated. Catherine remained motionless, her champagne untouched. Natalie Brooks, Diane's maid of honor, looked between the bride and her mother with obvious discomfort. A few of Catherine's closest friends, the ones who'd been part of her inner circle for decades, wore expressions of deep disapproval, though whether it was directed at Marcus's boldness or Catherine's exposed prejudice, I couldn't tell. Diane finally moved, standing up from the head table. For a moment I thought she might come to Catherine's defense, might demand an explanation from her new husband for embarrassing her mother at her own wedding. Instead, she walked over to where I stood, her wedding gown rustling with each step. We hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to each other in the past 5 years. Our relationship had always been distant, more like strangers forced into proximity than sisters. She'd never been overtly cruel like Catherine, but her indifference had been its own kind of pain. Up close, I could see the conflict playing out behind her eyes, years of conditioning warring with something else. "I didn't know," she said quietly, her voice barely audible beneath the resuming hum of conversation. "About your company. About any of it." I nodded slowly, unsure what she wanted from me. An explanation? An absolution? You never asked, I said, and the simplicity of it hung between us. She flinched slightly, and I realized she understood exactly what I meant. She'd never asked about my life, my dreams, my struggles. She'd accepted Catherine's narrative without question, accepting the comfortable fiction that I was somehow less deserving of attention or care. To her credit, something shifted in her expression. You're right. I should have. She glanced back at Catherine, who was now surrounded by several concerned friends, their voices low and urgent. She's going to be impossible after this. She's always been impossible, I said, surprised by the lack of bitterness in my own voice. Maybe Marcus's intervention had lanced some infected wound I'd been carrying. Diane almost smiled. That's fair. She hesitated, then added, I'm glad you came. And I'm glad Marcus did what he did. Someone needed to. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever received from her. Before I could respond, she was pulled away by one of her bridesmaids, absorbed back into the celebration. I watched her go, feeling something complicated and unfinished settling in my chest. Marcus appeared at my elbow, his expression concerned. I hope that wasn't too much. I saw you near the terrace when Catherine was speaking to my mother. You heard what she said. Every word, I confirmed, meeting his eyes. Why did you do that? You could have just let it go, enjoyed your wedding without creating drama. He shook his head firmly. Because what she said was wrong. And because I meant what I told everyone. I've worked with Apex Solutions. Your team consulted on our European expansion last year. You personally saved us from a disastrous logistics error that would have cost millions. You deserve recognition, and you certainly deserve basic human respect from your own family. I felt unexpected tears prick at my eyes and blinked them back rapidly. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Marcus replied. Just enjoy the rest of the evening. Or leave if you prefer. But know that you have every right to be here, and anyone who suggests otherwise can answer to me. He squeezed my shoulder briefly, then returned to his bride, leaving me standing in the middle of the reception hall with the weight of 200 conversations pressing against me. The evening continued around me with surreal normalcy. The band started playing again, and couples moved onto the dance floor. Servers circulated with dessert, elaborate confections that probably required architectural degrees to construct. But everything felt different now, charged with an awareness that hadn't existed before Marcus's toast. People approached me throughout the next hour, some with genuine curiosity about my work, others clearly hoping to gather gossip about the family drama they'd just witnessed. I fielded questions about Apex Solutions with practiced ease, slipping into the professional confidence I'd cultivated over years of client pitches and board presentations. Several guests admitted they'd heard of my company, had read articles or seen interviews. One woman, someone I vaguely remembered from my childhood as a friend of Catherine's, apologized for not recognizing me earlier, her discomfort obvious and almost satisfying. Catherine herself remained at the head table, surrounded by her closest allies. I caught her staring at me several times, her expression unreadable from across the room. She didn't approach me, didn't attempt to explain or defend her comments. Instead, she seemed to retreat into a cold dignity, her spine rigid, her smile fixed whenever anyone looked her way. Helen Donovan, by contrast, made a point of finding me during the cake cutting. She introduced herself properly, her handshake firm and her eyes kind. My son told me about working with your company, she said. He speaks very highly of your team's capabilities. I'm glad he had the courage to speak up tonight. Some things need to be said out loud. It was brave of him, I agreed, glancing toward where Marcus stood with his arm around Diane, both of them now accepting congratulations and well wishes from a line of guests. And potentially very uncomfortable for your new daughter-in-law. Helen followed my gaze. Diane will be fine. Better than fine, actually. She's married to someone who stands up for what's right even when it's difficult. That's a good foundation for a marriage. She paused, then added more quietly, Catherine has built her entire identity around appearances and social standing. Having that challenged publicly, having her cruelty exposed. It's probably the worst thing that could happen to her from her perspective. But sometimes the worst thing is also the most necessary thing. I found myself warming to this woman, appreciating her directness. You seem remarkably calm about your son creating a scene at his own wedding reception. Helen laughed softly. Oh, I'm furious with Catherine, not with Marcus. What she said about you was appalling. My husband and I have been in business for 30 years. We've worked with brilliant people from every possible background. The idea that someone's worth is determined by their parents' marital status at the time of their birth, it's medieval and cruel. She glanced toward Catherine's table. Though I suspect she's realizing that her attempt to diminish you has backfired spectacularly. You've handled this evening with remarkable grace. As the reception wore on, I began to feel the exhaustion of maintaining composure under such intense scrutiny. My feet ached in my heels, and the emotional whiplash of the evening had left me drained. I decided to make my exit during the bouquet toss, using the distraction to slip away without lengthy goodbyes. I retrieved my clutch from the table and headed toward the main entrance, grateful for the cool night air as I stepped outside. The parking lot was quieter now, just a few valets standing near their station, and the muffled sound of music drifting from the reception hall behind me. Leaving without saying goodbye? Catherine's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and cold. I turned to find her standing near one of the garden pathways, still impeccably dressed but with something frayed around the edges now. Her eyes glittered in the landscape lighting, hard and accusatory. I took a steadying breath. I didn't think you'd notice or care. She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the stone walkway. You've managed to ruin my daughter's wedding with your presence, just as you've ruined everything else by existing. Satisfied? The cruelty in her voice was so familiar it almost didn't hurt anymore, almost being the operative word. I didn't ruin anything, I said quietly. I came because Diane invited me. I sat quietly in the back. I didn't cause a scene. You're the one who chose to make disparaging comments about illegitimate children within earshot of people who actually value human decency over bloodlines. Catherine's face flushed with anger. How dare you speak to me that way? After everything I've tolerated, having you at family functions, pretending you belong. Your father forced me to include you, but he's gone now. There's no reason I have to continue this charade. You're absolutely right, I agreed, and something in my calm tone seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. There's no reason at all. So let me make this easy for you, Catherine. This is the last time you'll see me at a family function. I'm done trying to earn approval from someone determined to withhold it. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not for circumstances I couldn't control. You can keep your conditional acceptance and your social circle that values appearances over integrity. I don't need any of it. She stared at me, clearly not expecting this response. For years I'd accepted her cold tolerance, grateful for scraps of acknowledgement. But standing here now, after Marcus had publicly validated my worth, after spending a decade building something meaningful in Seattle, I realized I'd outgrown the need for her approval. Catherine seemed to realize it too, and it clearly unsettled her. Your father would be ashamed of how you've turned out, she said, grasping for a weapon that might still wound. I smiled sadly. My father loved me despite your disapproval. He made mistakes, absolutely, but he never made me feel like my existence was one of them. That was all you. Before she could respond, Helen Donovan emerged from the reception hall, her eyes taking in the scene immediately. Catherine, guests are asking for you inside. The bride and groom are about to leave for their hotel. It was clearly a diplomatic interruption, and I silently thanked her for it. Catherine straightened, her mask sliding back into place with visible effort. She turned without another word and walked back inside, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. Helen waited until she was gone, then turned to me with concern. Are you all right? I will be, I said honestly. Thank you for the interruption. And for raising a son who stands up for people even when it complicates his own celebration. Helen smiled warmly. Come visit us in Seattle sometime. Marcus has an office there, and I'd love to hear more about your work. I have a feeling we'd have a lot to discuss. She handed me a business card with her contact information. I mean it. Don't let tonight be the end of something. Let it be a beginning instead. I took the card, touched by her kindness. I'd like that. The drive back to my hotel felt surreal, the city lights of Portland streaming past my windows as I replayed the evening in my mind. The shock of Marcus's public acknowledgement, the weight of Catherine's cruelty finally exposed, the surprising moment of connection with Diane, however brief and incomplete. And most unexpectedly, the sense of liberation that came from finally severing my need for Catherine's approval. My phone buzzed with messages as I pulled into the hotel parking garage. Kevin had texted multiple times asking how the wedding went. There were also messages from several people I'd met at the reception, including Patricia Reed asking if I'd be interested in consulting on a series of high-profile events, and 2 business inquiries from guests who'd looked up Apex Solutions during the reception. I smiled at the irony. Catherine had tried to diminish me by highlighting my illegitimacy, and instead she'd inadvertently networked on my behalf, ensuring everyone at that reception now knew exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished. In her attempt to put me in my place, she'd elevated my profile among Portland's elite more effectively than any marketing campaign could have. I responded to Kevin first, typing out a brief summary that I knew would lead to a much longer phone conversation tomorrow. Wedding was eventful. Groom publicly acknowledged my company after mother made dismissive comments about illegitimate children. Whole thing was surreal. We'll call tomorrow with details. I'm fine, actually better than fine. Back in my hotel room, I kicked off my heels and stood at the window looking out over Portland's skyline. This city held so many painful memories, years of feeling like an outsider in my own family, of watching from the margins while Diane received love and attention I was denied. But tonight had reframed something fundamental. I wasn't the problem. I'd never been the problem. Catherine's inability to see past social conventions and extend basic human kindness to a child who'd done nothing wrong, that was the problem. And it was her problem, not mine. I changed into comfortable clothes and ordered room service, suddenly ravenous. While I waited for food to arrive, I pulled out my laptop and checked my work emails, grounding myself in the familiar rhythm of business communications and project updates. Apex Solutions had 3 major presentations scheduled for the following week, including one for a potential client that could double our revenue. I had a team of talented people counting on me, projects that mattered, work that challenged and fulfilled me. This was my real life, not the painful family dynamics I'd tried so hard to navigate. The food arrived, and I ate slowly, processing everything that had happened. Tomorrow I'd drive back to Seattle, back to my apartment with the view of Elliott Bay, back to my office where people respected my decisions and valued my contributions. Tonight had been an ending of sorts, the final severing of hope that Catherine might someday accept me. But endings create space for new beginnings, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely free from the weight of her judgment. My phone rang just after 10. I answered without checking the caller ID, expecting Kevin or maybe one of my team members with a question about Monday's presentation. Instead, Diane's voice came through, tentative and unsure. Victoria? It's me. Do you have a minute? I sat up straighter, surprised. Of course. What's going on? Shouldn't you be with your new husband? She laughed, a sound I couldn't remember hearing directed at me before. Marcus is taking a shower. We're at the hotel before flying out tomorrow. I wanted to call before I lost my nerve. Okay, I said carefully, unsure where this was heading. Diane took an audible breath. I owe you an apology. A real one, not the half-hearted thing I said at the reception. I've spent my whole life accepting Mother's version of things without question. She said you were different, that your presence complicated our family, and I just believed her. I never bothered to get to know you, never asked about your life or your dreams. I let her prejudices become my own through sheer laziness and comfort. The words hung between us, honest and uncomfortable. Marcus told me what Mother said about illegitimate children not belonging. He said you heard it. I'm horrified, Victoria. Not just because it's cruel, but because I've been complicit in that cruelty through my silence and indifference all these years. I felt something shift in my chest, a tightness I hadn't fully acknowledged beginning to loosen. I appreciate you saying that. Diane continued, her voice gaining strength. I looked up your company tonight after Marcus's toast. I read articles about you, interviews, profiles. You've built something incredible. And I knew nothing about it because I never cared enough to ask. That's on me, not on Mother. I'm an adult. I should have made my own decisions about who deserves my time and respect. She paused. I'd like to change that if you're willing. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights while considering her words. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from further disappointment. But another part, the part that remembered being children together before Catherine's poison fully took hold, that part wanted to believe change was possible. I'm willing to try, I said finally. But it has to be genuine, Diane. I can't keep being the afterthought you include out of obligation. She exhaled shakily. It will be genuine. I promise. Marcus helped me see tonight what I should have seen years ago, that family isn't about biology or legitimacy or social standing. It's about showing up for each other, about choosing to value people for who they are. I want to be the kind of sister who shows up for you, if you'll let me. We talked for another 20 minutes, a halting but honest conversation about expectations and boundaries, about the years of distance and the possibility of building something better. She told me about her honeymoon plans, asked about my work, and listened, really listened, in a way she never had before. When we finally said goodbye, I felt cautiously hopeful. People could change. Not always, not easily, but sometimes the right catalyst could shift perspectives that had seemed permanently fixed. Marcus's intervention had been that catalyst, forcing everyone including Diane to confront truths they'd been avoiding. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, the tension I'd been carrying finally releasing its grip on my shoulders and chest. The next morning, I packed my things and checked out of the hotel, ready to return to Seattle. As I loaded my car, Patricia Reed appeared in the parking lot, clearly having sought me out. I'm so glad I caught you, she said, slightly breathless. I wanted to give you my card and see if you'd be interested in consulting for some of my events. After watching how you handled yourself last night, especially after everything that happened, I think you'd be perfect for helping my corporate clients with their team-building retreats and leadership development. We exchanged information and talked for a few minutes about potential collaboration. As she walked away, I realized this was the third business opportunity that had emerged directly from last night's drama. Catherine had intended to humiliate me, to remind everyone of my illegitimate status and questionable place in proper society. Instead, she'd given me the most effective introduction possible to Portland's professional community. The drive back to Seattle was peaceful, the spring landscape rolling past my windows in shades of green and gold. I stopped for coffee at a small town halfway home and checked my phone to find more messages. Kevin had sent a string of laughing emojis along with, "Cannot wait to hear this story in detail." Several board members from Apex Solutions had reached out after apparently seeing mentions of the wedding drama on social media, wanting to make sure I was okay and expressing support. Most surprisingly, there was an email from Charles Bennett, my former professor from business school who'd mentored me through some of my darkest moments of self-doubt. He'd somehow heard about the wedding incident through academic circles and wrote a brief but powerful message. Victoria, I heard about what happened at your sister's wedding. I want you to remember what I told you 10 years ago when you were questioning whether you belonged in my graduate program. Your worth has nothing to do with anyone else's recognition or approval. You've proven that spectacularly. Keep building the life you've earned. The people who matter see you clearly. I saved the email, knowing I'd return to it on difficult days when old insecurities tried to resurface. By the time I crossed back into Seattle, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of Catherine's judgment, the exhausting effort of trying to earn approval that would never come, the sense of being fundamentally flawed because of circumstances I couldn't control, all of it had been cut loose. I was free. Not because Catherine had changed or because Diane had apologized, though both mattered, but because I'd finally internalized what Marcus had publicly declared. My legitimacy didn't come from birth certificates or family acceptance. It came from the life I'd built, the integrity I maintained, and the people I chose to surround myself with. Monday morning arrived with the familiar rhythm of my Seattle routine. I woke to sunlight streaming through my apartment windows, the Space Needle visible in the distance against a backdrop of Puget Sound. My morning coffee tasted better than usual, and I found myself humming while getting ready for work, something I hadn't done in weeks. The weight I'd been carrying had lifted, replaced by a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. Whatever happened with Catherine or Diane or any of the complicated family dynamics, I was solid in myself in a way I'd never been before. The Apex Solutions office occupied 3 floors of a renovated building in South Lake Union, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the water. I'd chosen the space specifically because it felt the opposite of stuffy corporate culture, open and collaborative with plenty of natural light. My team was already gathered in the main conference room when I arrived, preparing for our presentation to a potential client that afternoon. Kevin looked up when I walked in, his expression immediately shifting to concern mixed with curiosity. He'd known me long enough to read the subtle changes in my demeanor, and he could clearly tell something significant had happened over the weekend. "Conference room B in 10 minutes, I told him quietly. "I'll fill you in." He nodded, finishing up with the team before joining me in the smaller private space we used for sensitive conversations. I gave him the full story, starting with Catherine's comment about illegitimate children and ending with Marcus's public acknowledgement and the subsequent fallout. Kevin listened without interrupting, his expressions cycling through disbelief, anger on my behalf, and finally something like satisfaction. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head slowly. "That took some serious courage from your brother-in-law," he said. "Calling out his new mother-in-law at his own wedding reception? That's not something most people would do regardless of how justified." I nodded in agreement. I still can't quite believe it happened. Part of me keeps expecting to wake up and realize it was all some stress-induced dream. Kevin grinned. "Well, the business inquiries you got are definitely real. I ran background checks on those companies this morning like you asked. All legitimate, all potentially lucrative partnerships. Your family drama just became our best networking event of the year." We both laughed at the absurdity of it, the way Catherine's attempt to diminish me had backfired so spectacularly. The presentation that afternoon went flawlessly. Our potential client, a manufacturing company looking to streamline their supply chain operations, signed a contract on the spot, a deal worth over $2 million. The team celebrated with champagne in the office afterward, and I found myself genuinely present in the moment, not distracted by family obligations or dreading the next uncomfortable interaction. This was my world, the one I'd built from nothing, and it felt more secure than ever. Over the next few days, life settled into a productive rhythm. I followed up on the business leads from the wedding, including a promising conversation with Patricia Reed about corporate event consulting. The Portland connections I'd made, ironically through Catherine's social circle, opened doors I hadn't expected. Several people reached out directly, mentioning they'd heard about my work at the wedding and wanted to explore potential collaborations. One woman, the wife of a tech executive, even admitted she'd been looking for a consulting firm and had been impressed by how I'd handled the tense situation with grace. Diane texted periodically, small messages at first, photos from her honeymoon in Greece, an article she'd read about women in tech that made her think of me. The communication was tentative, like 2 people learning to speak a new language together, but it felt genuine. She asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. She told me about her own career in interior design, a passion I hadn't known she had because we'd never talked about anything meaningful before. It wasn't a full relationship yet, more like the foundation of one being carefully constructed, but it was more than we'd ever had. Catherine, predictably, remained silent. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement of what had happened at the wedding. I heard through Diane that she'd been furious for days afterward, complaining to her inner circle about being embarrassed at her own daughter's reception. According to Diane, several of Catherine's friends had actually pushed back, suggesting that perhaps her comments about illegitimate children had been inappropriate and that Marcus's response had been justified. The fact that her own social circle wasn't automatically supporting her seemed to shake Catherine more than anything else. Her carefully constructed image as the gracious, dignified matriarch had been tarnished, and she had no one to blame but herself. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received an unexpected email. The subject line simply read, "Business Proposition," and the sender was Helen Donovan. I opened it with curiosity, wondering what Marcus's mother wanted. Her message was professional but warm, explaining that she and her husband owned a venture capital firm focused on supporting women-led businesses in the Pacific Northwest. They'd been following Apex Solutions' growth and were interested in discussing potential investment opportunities. She suggested lunch the following week if I was available. I stared at the email for a long moment, processing the implications. This wasn't charity or pity. Helen had done her research, attached documents showing detailed analysis of my company's financials and growth trajectory. This was a legitimate business opportunity from someone who clearly saw the value in what I'd built. I responded immediately, suggesting several possible dates and expressing genuine interest in learning more about their firm. We settled on Thursday lunch at a restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay, neutral territory where we could talk freely. The intervening days felt electric with possibility. I prepared thoroughly, reviewing our financial projections, analyzing our growth potential, and considering what strategic partnership with a venture capital firm might mean for Apex Solutions. Kevin helped me develop a presentation, though Helen had made it clear this was an exploratory conversation rather than a formal pitch. Still, I wanted to be ready. This felt like vindication of a different sort, not emotional but professional, an acknowledgement that my work stood on its own merits completely separate from family drama. Thursday arrived with typical Seattle weather, overcast but not raining, the kind of gray sky that made the water look silver. I dressed carefully in a navy suit that conveyed professionalism without being overly formal, and arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early. Helen was already there, seated at a corner table with a view of the ferries crossing the Sound. She stood when she saw me, her handshake firm and her smile genuine. We ordered lunch and spent the first 20 minutes on pleasant conversation, discussing Seattle's tech scene, the challenges of scaling businesses, and shared acquaintances in the professional community. Then Helen set down her water glass and shifted into business mode, her expression becoming more focused. "I want to be direct about why I reached out, Victoria. Yes, I met you at my son's wedding, and yes, I was impressed by how you handled a difficult situation. But that's not why I'm here. My husband and I have been tracking Apex Solutions for about 8 months, ever since you landed the Richardson Technologies contract. We invest in companies led by founders who demonstrate both strategic vision and operational excellence. Your firm checks every box we look for." She pulled out a tablet and walked me through their analysis. They'd done deep research, talking to my clients, reviewing our financial statements, even interviewing several of my employees, though I hadn't known about it. The picture they'd assembled was thorough and frankly flattering. They saw potential for significant expansion, particularly into international markets, and they had the resources and connections to facilitate that growth. The investment amount they were considering was substantial, enough to fund aggressive expansion while allowing me to maintain majority ownership and control. I listened carefully, asking questions when appropriate, my mind racing through possibilities. This wasn't just about money. Helen's firm brought expertise in scaling operations, connections throughout the Pacific Northwest business community, and most importantly, credibility that would open doors with larger clients. By the time lunch arrived, we'd shifted into a genuine strategic conversation, brainstorming possibilities and exploring synergies between their portfolio companies and my firm's capabilities. Helen was sharp, asking probing questions that demonstrated real understanding of consulting operations and market dynamics. "I'll be honest," I said during a pause in the conversation. "Part of me is wondering if this opportunity exists because of the wedding situation. If you're offering this out of some sense of obligation or sympathy." Helen's expression turned serious. "I understand why you think that, given everything that happened. But Victoria, I don't build my investment portfolio based on sympathy. I build it based on data and potential returns. If Apex Solutions wasn't a solid business with excellent growth prospects, we wouldn't be having this conversation regardless of family connections. The wedding gave me a chance to meet you personally, but our interest in your company existed before that." She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "What happened at the wedding, Marcus standing up for you, that wasn't about business. That was about basic human decency. But this conversation we're having now? This is purely professional. I need you to believe that, because if we move forward with a partnership, it has to be built on mutual respect and clear-eyed business assessment, not emotion. I believed her. The documentation she'd shown me, the depth of their research, the strategic questions she was asking, none of it suggested charity. This was an investor who'd identified a promising opportunity and was pursuing it with professional rigor. We finished lunch and agreed to continue discussions. Helen suggested I meet with her husband and their investment team, review their standard terms, and take time to consider whether the partnership made sense for Apex Solutions' long-term goals. As we walked out of the restaurant, she paused before heading to her car. I meant what I said at the wedding about staying in touch. I'm glad we've been able to turn that into something professionally meaningful. And for what it's worth, Catherine made a serious mistake in how she treated you. Not just morally, though that's obvious, but strategically. She had access to someone brilliant and capable, and she threw it away because of prejudice. That's her loss, not yours. The words stayed with me as I drove back to the office. Catherine had spent decades trying to minimize my existence, treating me as an embarrassment to be managed rather than a person to be valued. And in doing so, she'd cut herself off from any relationship with someone who'd gone on to build something successful and meaningful. I didn't need her validation anymore, but there was a certain satisfaction in recognizing that her loss was real. She'd never known me as an adult, never had the opportunity to feel proud of what I'd accomplished, never experienced whatever connection might have been possible if she'd chosen differently. Back at Apex Solutions, I gathered my senior team to discuss the potential investment opportunity. Kevin, along with our CFO Martin Hayes and our head of operations Rachel Kim, listened as I outlined Helen's proposal. Their questions were sharp and practical, focused on maintaining our company culture, protecting our decision-making autonomy, and ensuring any partnership aligned with our values. We spent 2 hours analyzing the opportunity from every angle, identifying potential concerns and mapping out what due diligence we'd need to conduct on the venture capital firm itself. This could be transformative, Rachel said thoughtfully. The capital would let us pursue the European expansion we'd been discussing. And their connections could help us land enterprise clients we'd been struggling to reach. Martin nodded agreement but added a caution. We need to make sure we're not giving up too much control. I've seen promising companies get swallowed by their investors. We'd need ironclad agreements about decision-making authority. Kevin had been quiet, his expression contemplative. When he finally spoke, his words cut to the heart of my own internal conflict. The real question is whether you can separate this opportunity from the family drama. If you take their investment and things go wrong professionally, will you be able to handle that cleanly? Or will it feel like another rejection? It was a fair concern, and I appreciated him voicing it directly. I've thought about that, I admitted. But I keep coming back to something Helen said. This opportunity existed before the wedding. Their firm had been tracking us for months. The personal connection just facilitated the introduction. And honestly, if anything, the family drama has given me clarity about keeping professional and personal separate. I've spent too many years letting family dynamics affect my sense of self-worth. I'm not going to let it affect my business decisions now. We agreed to move forward with exploring the opportunity while maintaining appropriate skepticism. Over the next 2 weeks, I met with Helen's partners, reviewed their investment history, and spoke with founders of other companies in their portfolio. Every conversation reinforced my initial impression. This was a professional firm with a strong track record, and their interest in Apex Solutions was based on solid business fundamentals. The terms they proposed were favorable, allowing me to maintain control while providing capital and strategic support for expansion. During this same period, my relationship with Diane continued its slow evolution. She called one evening, her voice tight with frustration, and asked if she could talk. I put her on speaker while I made dinner, and she launched into a story about having lunch with Catherine earlier that day. She spent the entire meal complaining about Marcus, Diane said. About how he embarrassed her at the wedding, how he had no right to interfere in family matters, how she's the victim in all of this. I finally asked her if she'd even considered that what she said about illegitimate children was hurtful and wrong. You know what she said? I stirred pasta sauce, waiting. She said that truth isn't hurtful, it's just truth. That society has standards for good reasons, and pretending those standards don't matter doesn't make them go away. She genuinely believes she did nothing wrong, Victoria. She thinks Marcus owes her an apology, not the other way around. I wasn't surprised, though hearing it still stung in a distant way, like pressing on a bruise that had mostly healed. That's been her position my entire life. I'm the problem, not her treatment of me. The circumstances of my birth are shameful, not her cruelty toward a child who had no control over those circumstances. Diane was quiet for a moment. I'm starting to understand why you stayed away from family events when you could. Why you built your life in Seattle instead of staying in Portland. She's never going to see her own behavior clearly, is she? It wasn't really a question, more of a realization spoken aloud. Probably not, I agreed gently. Some people are so invested in their worldview that changing it would require dismantling their entire sense of identity. It's easier to double down than to admit they've been wrong for decades. Diane sighed heavily. Marcus asked me last night if I wanted to keep having regular dinners with her. He said he'd support whatever I decided, but he wanted me to think about whether exposing ourselves to her toxicity on a weekly basis was healthy. What did you tell him? I asked, genuinely curious. Diane had spent her entire life as Catherine's golden child, the favored daughter who received all the love and attention I'd been denied. Walking away from that, even recognizing it as conditional and ultimately harmful, would be difficult. I told him I needed time to think about it. But honestly, Victoria, this whole thing has made me see our mother differently. She's not the gracious, dignified woman I always thought she was. She's someone who values appearances over people, who can be breathtakingly cruel when her sense of propriety is challenged. I don't know if I want that influence in my life anymore, let alone in my future children's lives. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but I found myself thinking about it long after we hung up. Catherine's inability to acknowledge her own cruelty was creating consequences beyond just our broken relationship. Her rigid worldview was now affecting her relationship with Diane, potentially costing her the one daughter who'd always been loyal. There was a tragic irony in it. The way her desperate attempt to maintain social standing and proper appearances was isolating her from the people who should have been closest to her. A month after the wedding, the investment deal with Helen's firm was finalized. The announcement went out through business channels, and my phone exploded with congratulatory messages. Industry colleagues, former classmates, and several clients reached out to acknowledge the milestone. Apex Solutions had officially entered a new phase of growth, and I felt simultaneously excited and terrified by the possibilities ahead. Kevin organized a celebration at the office, complete with champagne and catering from everyone's favorite Thai restaurant. The team gathered in our main conference room, laughing and making toasts to the future. Rachel pulled me aside during the celebration, her expression unusually serious. I want you to know that we all see what you've built here. Not just the business metrics, though those are impressive. But the culture, the way you've created a place where people feel valued regardless of their background or circumstances. That matters, Victoria. It matters to all of us. Her words hit me harder than I expected, bringing unexpected tears to my eyes. I blinked them back quickly, not wanting to get emotional in front of the team. Thank you. That means everything to me. She smiled warmly. I heard a little about what happened at your sister's wedding. Kevin mentioned it in general terms, nothing specific. But I wanted you to know that watching you lead this company, seeing how you treat people with respect and dignity, it's made a real difference in my life. I came here from a corporate environment that was toxic and demeaning. Apex Solutions showed me that business success doesn't require cruelty or hierarchy based on arbitrary factors. You've proven that thoroughly. I hugged her impulsively, grateful for the reminder of why I'd built this company in the first place. It wasn't just about professional success or financial security, though those mattered. It was about creating something that operated according to values I actually believed in, where people were judged on their contributions and character rather than circumstances they couldn't control. That evening, I drove to Cary Park, one of my favorite spots in Seattle with its panoramic view of the city skyline and Mount Rainier in the distance. I sat on a bench as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and reflected on everything that had happened since Diane's wedding. In the space of a month, my entire relationship with my family had been redefined. Catherine's cruelty had been exposed publicly, forcing everyone including Diane to confront truths they'd been avoiding. Marcus had demonstrated that standing up for what's right sometimes means making people uncomfortable, even at your own celebration. And I'd finally released the hope that Catherine would ever accept me, a hope I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying until it was gone. But more importantly, I'd been reminded that my worth wasn't determined by family acceptance or social standing or the circumstances of my birth. It was determined by the choices I made, the integrity I maintained, and the life I built. Apex Solutions was proof of that, solid evidence that I could create something meaningful and successful despite starting from a place of disadvantage and disapproval. The investment from Helen's firm was validation, not of my legitimacy as Catherine would define it, but of my capabilities and vision as a business leader. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously, half expecting some message from Catherine or one of her friends. Instead, it was from Marcus. "Hope you don't mind, Diane gave me your number. Just wanted to say congratulations on the investment news. Also wanted you to know that what I said at the wedding, I meant every word. Family isn't about biology or birth certificates. It's about showing up for each other. You're welcome at our table anytime, no qualifications required. Marcus and Diane." I read the message 3 times, feeling something warm and unexpected bloom in my chest. This was what family could be when it was chosen rather than obligated, when it was based on mutual respect rather than blood ties and social conventions. I typed back a simple response. "Thank you. That means more than you know. And congratulations again on the marriage. You two are building something good." The sky had deepened to purple by the time I left the park, stars beginning to emerge overhead. I drove home through familiar Seattle streets, past the office building that housed Apex Solutions, past coffee shops and bookstores and all the small markers of the life I'd constructed far from Portland's judgment. The following months brought changes I hadn't anticipated. The investment from Helen's firm accelerated our growth trajectory beyond even my optimistic projections. We hired 15 new consultants, opened a satellite office in Portland of all places, and secured contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. The Portland office was Kevin's idea, pitched with his characteristic blend of practicality and mischief. "Think about it," he'd said during our strategy meeting. "You've got name recognition there now thanks to the wedding drama. Half the city's business community looked up your company that night. We'd be foolish not to capitalize on it." He was right, though the irony wasn't lost on me. Catherine had spent decades trying to keep me at arm's length from Portland society, and now I was establishing a professional presence in her backyard. The office space we leased was in the Pearl District, a renovated warehouse with exposed beams and brick walls that perfectly captured the innovative culture we wanted to project. Rachel volunteered to manage the new location, excited by the challenge of building a team from scratch. We planned a soft opening for late summer, giving us time to recruit local talent and establish relationships with potential clients. Diane called the week after we announced the Portland office, her voice bright with excitement. "I saw the press release about Apex Solutions expanding here. Victoria, that's incredible. Marcus and I were just talking about how amazing it would be to have you closer, at least part of the time." Her enthusiasm was genuine, and I found myself smiling despite my initial reservations about increasing my Portland presence. "Rachel will be running the office day to day, but I'll be there regularly for client meetings and team development. It's strange to think about spending significant time in Portland again after working so hard to build a life away from there." Diane was quiet for a moment before responding. "I know the city holds a lot of painful memories for you. Mother made sure of that. But maybe this is a chance to rewrite some of those narratives, to claim space in Portland on your own terms rather than as someone seeking approval from people who didn't deserve your effort in the first place." Her insight surprised me. The Diane I'd known growing up had been self-absorbed and oblivious to the emotional dynamics swirling around our family. This new version, the one emerging from whatever transformation her marriage to Marcus had catalyzed, was more perceptive and empathetic. "When did you get so wise?" I asked, only half joking. She laughed. I married someone who actually communicates and expects me to think about things beyond surface appearances. It's been educational. She paused. Speaking of which, we're having a dinner party next month, just close friends and family. I'd really like you to come if you're available. No pressure, and I promise Mother won't be there. Marcus and I have been limiting our interactions with her to occasional lunches in public places where she's forced to maintain her composure. The invitation touched me more than I wanted to admit. A dinner party with close friends and family, being included in that circle not out of obligation but genuine desire for my company, it represented a kind of belonging I'd stopped hoping for years ago. I'd love to come. Just send me the date and I'll make sure I'm in town. We talked for a few more minutes about the menu she was planning and the mix of people she'd invited, her excitement palpable. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, marveling at how much had shifted in just a few months. The Apex Solutions team threw themselves into preparing for the Portland launch with impressive energy. We developed marketing materials highlighting our successful projects, reached out to business associations and chambers of commerce, and scheduled a series of meet-and-greet events with potential clients. Helen's firm proved invaluable during this process, introducing us to key decision-makers and lending credibility through their established reputation. I found myself traveling to Portland twice a week, staying in a small hotel near the office site and working long hours to ensure everything was positioned for success. During one of these trips, I ran into Gordon Price at a coffee shop downtown. He'd been at Diane's wedding, one of Catherine's longtime friends and a fixture in Portland's social scene. I braced myself for awkwardness, but his greeting was surprisingly warm. "Victoria, I was hoping I'd bump into you. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up at your sister's wedding when Catherine made those comments. I should have said something, but I froze like a coward." His candor caught me off guard. "I appreciate you saying that, but you're not responsible for Catherine's behavior or for defending me against it." He shook his head firmly. "Maybe not responsible, but definitely complicit through silence. I've known Catherine for 25 years, watched her treat you like an inconvenience your entire life. And I never once challenged her on it because maintaining social harmony seemed more important than standing up for basic decency." Marcus showed me what courage actually looks like that night. We talked for nearly an hour, Gordon asking thoughtful questions about my business and sharing stories about his own company's growth. Before parting, he handed me his card and suggested we grab lunch to discuss potential collaboration between our firms. These encounters became more common as I spent increased time in Portland. People who'd witnessed the wedding confrontation seemed to view me differently now, no longer as Catherine's embarrassing complication but as a successful professional in my own right. Some of that was certainly Marcus's public validation, but much of it stemmed from simple visibility. By establishing a business presence in Portland, by showing up confidently and competently, I was rewriting the narrative that had defined me for so long. I was no longer the illegitimate daughter seeking acceptance. I was Victoria Hartwell, CEO, and people were choosing to engage with me on those terms. The Portland office opened in early September with a reception that drew nearly 100 attendees. Local business leaders, potential clients, representatives from the mayor's office, and several journalists covering the city's growing tech scene. Rachel had done an outstanding job creating an inviting space, and the team we'd assembled was sharp and enthusiastic. I gave brief remarks about our mission and values, emphasizing our commitment to ethical consulting practices and building long-term relationships rather than pursuing quick profits. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with several attendees approaching afterward to schedule follow-up meetings. Diane and Marcus attended the reception, along with Helen and her husband Thomas. Watching them mingle with other guests, offering genuine support and making introductions, I felt a swell of gratitude for these people who'd chosen to invest in me both literally and emotionally. This was family by choice, people who showed up not because blood or obligation demanded it but because they valued what I was building. Near the end of the evening, Marcus pulled me aside with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you'll take it." My stomach tightened reflexively, old anxiety surfacing despite months of positive developments. "Okay, what's going on?" He glanced around to ensure we had relative privacy. "Catherine showed up at our house last week. Unannounced, which you know isn't like her. She wanted to talk about you, specifically about what she called my interference in family matters at our wedding. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. What did she say? Marcus's expression was a mix of frustration and something like pity. She's convinced herself that I humiliated her intentionally, that I was punishing her for some imagined slight against my family. She doesn't seem capable of understanding that my response had nothing to do with her and everything to do with standing up for someone being treated cruelly. I tried to explain that your professional accomplishments were real and impressive regardless of family dynamics, that my acknowledgement of you was based on merit, not manipulation. She didn't want to hear it. He paused, collecting his thoughts. She also made it clear that she considers your return to Portland, the new office, all of it, as some kind of calculated revenge plot. In her mind, you're deliberately trying to embarrass her by succeeding publicly in her social territory. The idea that you might just be running a business and making strategic decisions based on market opportunities, she can't seem to grasp that. Everything has to be about her and her perceived victimhood. I absorbed this information with a strange sense of detachment. Months ago, Catherine's continued hostility would have devastated me. Now it felt almost irrelevant, like hearing about bad weather in a city I no longer lived in. How did you leave things with her? I asked. Marcus sighed heavily. I told her that she needed to take responsibility for her own words and actions, that continuing to blame everyone else for consequences she'd created wasn't going to repair any relationships. I also made it clear that you're part of our family now, that Diane and I consider you someone we value and want in our lives, and that our relationship with you isn't conditional on Catherine's approval. His words settled over me like a warm blanket, protective and affirming. Thank you for that. And I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this dysfunction. He smiled slightly. I'm not caught in the middle. I've chosen a side, the side that aligns with my values. Catherine can either accept that and adjust her behavior, or she can remain isolated by her own stubbornness. That's her choice to make. We rejoined the reception, but his words stayed with me throughout the evening. Catherine's inability to see beyond her wounded pride was costing her relationships with people who should have been closest to her. Diane was pulling away, Marcus had drawn clear boundaries, and I had stopped seeking her approval entirely. She was creating her own loneliness through rigid adherence to prejudices that served no one. The dinner party Diane hosted the following month was everything she'd promised, intimate and warm with genuine conversation flowing easily among the guests. She'd invited 2 other couples, friends from their social circle who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me rather than mining for gossip about family drama. We ate on their back patio as the evening cooled, string lights casting a soft glow over the table. Marcus grilled salmon while Diane orchestrated side dishes with the ease of someone who genuinely enjoyed hosting. I found myself relaxing in a way I rarely did at social gatherings, the absence of Catherine's judgmental presence creating space for authentic connection. One of the guests, a woman named Claire who worked in marketing, asked about my experience building Apex solutions from the ground up. I shared some of the story, the early days of working from my apartment, the first major client who took a chance on an unknown firm, the gradual process of building credibility and expanding our capabilities. Claire listened with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated she was actually engaged rather than just being polite. What I find most impressive, she said thoughtfully, is that you did all of this while apparently dealing with significant family challenges. That takes remarkable resilience. I glanced at Diane, unsure how much she'd shared with her friends about our family dynamics. She met my eyes with a small nod, giving me permission to be honest if I chose. My family situation was complicated, I said carefully. I wasn't always made to feel welcome or valued, which certainly created obstacles. But in some ways, that difficulty clarified what I needed to build for myself. I couldn't rely on family connections or inherited advantages, so I had to create my own path based purely on capability and hard work. That foundation has served me well. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Claire's husband David brought it back around later with a comment that caught me off guard. I was at your sister's wedding actually. I'm a colleague of Marcus's, though we'd never met before that event. I witnessed what happened with the toast and the aftermath. I just want to say, the way you handled that situation with such composure, it was remarkable. And frankly, it made me immediately interested in your company because it demonstrated the kind of character I look for in business partners." He pulled out his phone and showed me his screen, an email draft addressed to Apex Solutions requesting a consultation for his company's upcoming restructuring project. I wrote this the next day but hesitated to send it because I didn't want you to think I was reaching out just because of the drama. But after talking with you tonight, seeing how you've built your business and the values you operate from, I'm confident this would be a mutually beneficial relationship. We exchanged contact information, and I promised to have someone from my team reach out to schedule an initial meeting. After he and Claire left, Diane walked me to my car with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Tonight was wonderful," I told her honestly. "Thank you for including me, and for creating a space where I felt genuinely welcome rather than tolerated." She hugged me tightly, something she'd never done before our adult relationship began developing. "You are welcome, always. Marcus and I want you to know that our home is your home, no qualifications or conditions attached. We're family, the real kind, the kind that chooses to show up for each other." Driving back to my hotel, I reflected on how profoundly my definition of family had evolved. Blood relationships that had caused pain and rejection for decades mattered far less than chosen relationships built on mutual respect and authentic care. The business continued flourishing through fall and into early winter. Our Portland office exceeded revenue projections, landing several significant contracts including one with David's company. Rachel built a strong team culture that mirrored what we'd established in Seattle, creating an environment where diverse perspectives were valued and merit determined advancement. I split my time between both offices, enjoying the challenge of managing expansion while maintaining the quality and values that had made Apex Solutions successful in the first place. In November, I received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership conference in Portland. The organizers specifically mentioned wanting to feature entrepreneurs who'd overcome significant obstacles to build successful companies. I accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to share lessons learned and potentially inspire others facing their own challenges. The week before the conference, I worked with Kevin to develop my remarks, trying to strike a balance between honesty about difficulties and maintaining appropriate professional boundaries around family specifics. The conference took place at a downtown hotel, with several hundred attendees representing various industries and career stages. I was scheduled to speak during the afternoon session, following a panel discussion on work-life balance. Backstage, I reviewed my notes one final time, feeling the familiar flutter of pre-presentation nerves. Then I stepped onto the stage, looking out at rows of faces turned toward me with expectation and interest. I began with my professional background, outlining Apex Solutions' growth and the strategic decisions that had driven our success. But then I shifted into more personal territory, talking about the experience of building a career without family support or inherited advantages. "Many of you face obstacles in your professional lives," I said, making eye contact with various audience members. "Some of those obstacles are systemic, structural barriers that require collective action to dismantle. But some are more personal, family members who don't believe in your capabilities, social circles that judge you based on circumstances beyond your control, internalized voices telling you that you don't belong in spaces you've earned the right to occupy." The room had gone very quiet, people leaning forward in their seats. I spent years trying to earn approval from people determined to withhold it, trying to prove I was worthy of basic respect and inclusion. That effort was exhausting and ultimately futile because the problem wasn't me. It was never me. I shared the wedding story then, carefully and without excessive detail, but honestly about Catherine's comments and Marcus's response. I talked about the liberation that came from finally releasing the need for validation from people who'd proven they would never offer it. "The most important thing I've learned," I concluded, "is that your worth isn't determined by anyone's recognition or approval. It's determined by the integrity you maintain, the quality of work you produce, and the positive impact you have on people around you. Build your life based on those foundations, and the right people will see your value clearly. The ones who don't, that's their limitation, not yours." The applause was immediate and sustained, people rising to their feet throughout the ballroom. I felt tears prick my eyes at the response, overwhelmed by this roomful of strangers who seemed to understand exactly what I'd been trying to articulate. During the question and answer session that followed, several women shared their own stories of family rejection or professional discrimination, thanking me for giving voice to experiences they'd struggled to express. One woman in her 50s stood up, her voice shaking slightly. "My parents disowned me 30 years ago for marrying someone they didn't approve of. I've built a successful career and a beautiful family, but I've never stopped mourning their rejection. Hearing you talk about releasing that need for their approval, it feels like permission I didn't know I needed." After the formal session ended, I was surrounded by attendees wanting to continue the conversation, exchange contact information, or simply express gratitude for my honesty. I stayed for nearly 2 hours, talking with as many people as time allowed, energized rather than drained by the interactions. These were my people, individuals who understood the particular pain of family rejection and the hard work of building self-worth from internal rather than external sources. As the crowd finally thinned, one of the conference organizers approached with a request to consider developing my talk into a longer workshop series they could offer at future events. I drove home to Seattle that evening rather than staying in Portland, needing the familiar comfort of my own apartment after such an emotionally intense day. The highway was relatively empty, and I let my mind wander across the landscape of the past 6 months. So much had changed since Diane's wedding, both externally in terms of business success and family relationships, and internally in my understanding of self-worth and belonging. Catherine's cruelty, intended to diminish me, had instead catalyzed transformation that reached far beyond just my own healing. It had forced Diane to examine her complicity, prompted Marcus to take a public stand for his values, and ultimately created opportunities for connection I'd never imagined possible. The next morning brought an unexpected email from someone I hadn't thought about in years. The sender was Elizabeth Morrison, my father's sister and therefore my aunt, though we'd had minimal contact since his death. Catherine had effectively frozen out Richard's family after he passed, controlling access to family events and making it clear that maintaining relationships with his relatives was unwelcome. Elizabeth's message was warm and direct, explaining that she'd heard about my conference presentation from a friend who attended, and had subsequently looked up information about Apex Solutions and my professional accomplishments. "I'm ashamed it took me this long to reach out," she wrote. "Your father would be so proud of what you've built, and I should have made more effort to stay connected with you after he died. Catherine made that difficult, but that's no excuse for my absence. I'd love to meet for coffee if you're willing to give me a chance to know the remarkable woman you've become." I read the email 3 times, emotions swirling in complicated patterns. My father's family had been kind during my childhood, always treating me with warmth during the rare occasions when we saw each other. But after his death, that connection had dissolved, and I'd assumed they'd simply accepted Catherine's narrative about me being an inconvenient complication best kept at distance. I responded cautiously, suggesting we meet the next time I was in Portland for work. Elizabeth wrote back immediately, proposing a specific date and offering to come to Seattle if that was easier for me. Her eagerness to reconnect felt genuine, and I found myself looking forward to the meeting despite lingering wariness about opening myself to potential disappointment. We settled on lunch in Portland the following week, at a quiet restaurant away from the business district where we could talk without constant interruptions. Elizabeth was waiting when I arrived, seated at a corner table with windows overlooking a small garden. She stood as I approached, and I was struck by how much she resembled my father, the same warm brown eyes and gentle smile I remembered from childhood. We hugged briefly, that awkward embrace of people who share history but haven't maintained connection. She ordered coffee for both of us, and we spent the first few minutes on safe topics: her recent retirement from teaching, my commute between Seattle and Portland, the weather turning colder as December approached. Then she set down her cup and looked at me directly. "I need to say this plainly. I failed you after your father died. Catherine made it clear that maintaining contact with Richard's family wasn't welcome, and I let that boundary stand instead of fighting for you. I told myself you were an adult, that you didn't need me. But the truth is I took the easy path, avoiding confrontation rather than making sure you knew you had family who cared about you." Her honesty disarmed me completely. "I appreciate you saying that. It's been lonely, feeling like I lost my entire family when Dad passed, not just him." Elizabeth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Your father loved you so much, Victoria. He felt tremendous guilt about the circumstances of your birth, about the pain his choices caused you. But he never once regretted your existence. You were his joy. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could stop them. I miss him every day. He was the only person in that family who made me feel like I mattered. She nodded, her own eyes glistening. He would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. Building your company, creating success on your own terms, that's exactly the kind of resilience and determination he always saw in you. We talked for hours, Elizabeth sharing stories about my father I'd never heard, about his own struggles with family expectations and his determination to ensure I had opportunities despite Catherine's hostility. She told me about other relatives on his side, cousins and second cousins who'd asked about me over the years, who would welcome connection if I was interested. By the time lunch ended, we'd made plans for a family gathering during the holidays, a chance for me to reconnect with people who shared my father's blood and apparently his capacity for warmth. Christmas approached with unusual brightness. Diane invited me to spend Christmas Eve with her and Marcus, a small celebration just the three of us. Elizabeth organized a gathering for my father's extended family on Christmas Day, nearly 20 people eager to meet the niece and cousin they'd lost touch with years ago. I found myself looking forward to both events, surrounded by chosen family and rediscovered family, all of them wanting my presence without conditions or qualifications. The Apex Solutions holiday party was scheduled for the week before Christmas, a joint celebration bringing together both the Seattle and Portland teams. We rented a gallery space with soaring ceilings and contemporary art, catered by a fusion restaurant that perfectly captured our innovative spirit. Employees brought partners and friends, and the energy was celebratory and genuine. I gave a toast thanking everyone for their contributions to our remarkable year, acknowledging the hard work and dedication that had made our expansion successful. Kevin pulled me aside near the end of the evening, his expression thoughtful. You know what strikes me about tonight? How happy you look. Not just professionally satisfied, though obviously the business success is significant. But genuinely happy in a way I haven't seen in all the years we've worked together. I considered his observation, recognizing its truth. I think I finally understand the difference between proving myself to people who'll never be satisfied and building a life that actually reflects my values. One is exhausting and futile. The other is sustaining and meaningful. New Year's Eve found me back in Seattle, watching fireworks over Elliott Bay from my apartment balcony. I thought about the year ending, about how completely my life had transformed since Diane's wedding 11 months earlier. Catherine's cruelty had been the catalyst, but the real change had come from within, from finally releasing the need for her validation and recognizing my own worth independent of her judgment. My phone buzzed with messages as midnight approached. Diane and Marcus sending love and gratitude for the growing closeness between us. Elizabeth sharing a photo of my father from years ago with a note about how much he'd believed in me. Helen texting congratulations on our successful year and excitement about projects planned for the coming months. The new year stretched ahead full of possibility. Apex Solutions was positioned for continued growth, my relationships with Diane and my father's family were deepening authentically, and most importantly, I'd found peace with myself in a way that no external validation could provide. Catherine remained distant and hostile, but her opinion no longer had power over my sense of self. She'd tried to diminish me by highlighting my illegitimacy, and instead she'd freed me by forcing a final reckoning with the futility of seeking her approval. As fireworks burst across the sky in cascades of light and color, I raised my glass to the year ending and the one beginning. To chosen family and rediscovered connections. To building success on your own terms. To the liberation that comes from recognizing that some people's limitations are not your responsibility to overcome. And most of all, to the truth that legitimacy, worth, and belonging are never determined by circumstance of birth but by the character you cultivate and the life you build with integrity and courage. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.